Hello again. We are picking up where we left off with Afrofuturism. This lecture is going to be a lot shorter than the last one. I might break the last one into two parts because it went a little bit over, so I apologize for that. So we're going to talk about two things today. First is Afrofuturism, and then the second is company towns and labor organizing, because that's very relevant to the chunk of chapters of Parable of the Sower that we read for today. So let's get into it. Here's a quote from Yttasha L. Womack, who wrote this little essay that I asked you to read, which is one sort of excerpt. It's one chapter, it's one very short chapter from a book called Afrofuturism that she wrote, which sort of talks all about Afrofuturism. It's a really, really interesting book. I highly recommend it if you're interested in Afrofuturism in general. Okay. Imagination, hope, and the expectation for transformative change is a through line that undergirds most Afrofuturistic art, literature, music, and criticism. It is the collective, weighted belief that anchors the aesthetic. It is the prism through which some create their way of life. It's a view of the world. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Womack here could be saying this about any of the figures that we talked about in the last lecture, right? If there's one thing that Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, Black Lives Matter, and MLK Jr. all have in common, it is imagination, hope, and the expectation for transformative change. It is a refusal to take no for an answer on bringing that into reality. So what sets Afrofuturism apart from other forms of futurism, right? Because they're all about imagination and the future, right? Specifically, Afrofuturism is working on imagining worlds beyond race. So this essay starts with the question, can you imagine a world without the idea of race? Can you imagine a world where skin color, hair texture, national origin, and ethnicity are not determinants of power, class, beauty, or access? That's the key question here. Another important theme is considering race through a futurist, sci-fi, and or speculative lens. Womack writes, taking on this idea of race as a technology sparked new ideas in me. A deliberate byproduct of the transatlantic slave trade enforced by violence and law, race, i.e. the division of white and black and the power imbalances based on skin color. I've been talking too long. Simply didn't exist prior to 500 years ago. I share this in my talks, and I can see the churning of old thoughts and flickers of new ones when audiences begin to see race as a man-made creation. Race as a technology. Chooses this word for a reason, right? Technology. A lot of futurist and sci-fi and speculative literatures and sort of thought deals with technology, right? Technology is a much broader term than like just, oh, it's a computer, right? This is a technology. Race is a technology. It is an invention. And drawing our attention to that and putting that at sort of the forefront of what we're talking about when we talk about race is a hallmark of Afrofuturism. And so is seeing the imagination, futurism, and invention of everyday Black life that we often take for granted. So this whole paragraph is a Womack talking about an experience going to an exhibit on Black inventions and inventors, and realizing that even as a person who is like, Womack writes a whole list of everyday inventions that Black people invented that, like, to quote, I was familiar with quite a few of their inventions, or so I thought. The traffic light, the refrigerator, the blood bank, the ironing board, the modern-day computer, a frequent jaw dropper, the super soaker, the lawnmower. I'd heard about those before. The shock was the sheer volume of inventions, how they span every aspect of daily life, and their impact on the science world. I didn't know about the space shuttle. I didn't know that Kenneth Dunkley invented the 3D glasses I wear at every big-budget blockbuster, or that Dr. Philip Emeagwali invented the world's fastest computer. Dr. Shirley Jackson is credited with inventing and contributing to some of the major telecommunications developments of our time. The list goes on and on, right? Black people invented so and continue to invent so much of our world. And this kind of invention and creativity and imagination and like future thinking is an everyday aspect of Black life that is often overlooked. And so this is something that futurism calls attention to. And we can see a lot of this in Parable of the Sower, right? Lauren is a prophet and a visionary. She's very literally a visionary. She can also be seen as, consequently, the inventor of new ways of thinking and being. Also, Lauren's hyperempathy syndrome interrogates a lot of stereotypes and assumptions around Black women's pain, kind of like we talked about in last lecture, right? She feels far more than most people. She has to pretend to be numb for her own safety to prevent people from exploiting her vulnerability. Her family assumes that her hyperempathy was caused by drugs her birth mother took. And this in particular is significant given how widely circulated racial stereotypes around mothers who use drugs were at the time that this book came out, which was the 90s, right? The heyday of the quote unquote crack baby epidemic, which that's a subject for a whole nother day. Not in this class. We don't have time, unfortunately. But with all of these aspects of Lauren's hyperempathy syndrome and how people talk about it, Butler is calling into question the technology of race and how it is used, how racial ideologies are used to stigmatize and delegitimize Black women's pain. Butler also interrogates race in this work through how it works in Robledo versus on the outside. So this relevant quote from page 36, the Garfields and the Balters are white and the rest of us are Black. That can be dangerous these days. On the street, people are expected to fear and hate everyone but their own kind. Our neighborhood is too small for us to play those kinds of games. And we're back. Once again, I apologize. Allergies are killing me today. And I don't want to offer sneeze on camera in front of you if I can avoid it. What happened in this week's chapters? We've got the Payne Parish household fire and the subsequent robbery. We've got Reverend Olamina's disappearance and presumed death and the search for him that turns up nothing. We've got the Garfields leaving for Olivar. Lauren's first chance to preach to the group in the wake of her father's disappearance. And then we've got this pivotal moment with Curtis Talcott where they talk about running away together. And he asks if she was planning on leaving without him and heading north. And then we've got the fire, the bigger fire, where the entire neighborhood burns and then Robledo is attacked. And almost everybody is killed, including the rest of Lauren's family. And then we have, and presumably Curtis Talcott as well. And then we've got sort of her survival, Zara's survival, and Harry's survival, and the three of them figuring out what to do next. There's a lot that we could focus on here, but today we're going to focus on Olivar and how it connects to a very real phenomenon, which is the company town. So the text actually references this real history on page 128 where and 127 where Lauren is talking to Joanne Garfield about Olivar and specifically about whether or not Harry will go with Joanne. And Joanne says no, he won't. Like that they want to get married, but he's not going to come with her, and she can't stay. And Lauren asks, why won't he go to Olivar? And Joanne says, he thinks the way your father does. He thinks Olivar's a trap. He's read about 19th and early 20th century company towns, and he says, no matter how great Olivar looks, all we'll get from it in the end is debt and loss of freedom. I knew Harry had sense. So let's talk about it. Company towns. Very straightforwardly, a company town is a town owned by a company. Where everybody who lives there, or almost everybody, works for the company or is like in the family of somebody who works for that company, or potentially of the company, but usually they don't live in the town itself. And then sometimes there are people hired by that company to control or oversee or union bust those workers. Those people don't live there full time. They're sort of just like hauled in as relevant to do security, threaten people, things like that. And then significantly, a company town is a place where all the money that you make at that job for that company ends up back in that company's pockets because the company typically owns all the stores in the town too. So where you buy your food, they also own your house, so that you pay rent to them. So you work for a company, you pay your rent to that company with your wages that you got from that company. You buy groceries from the store run by that company. They get most of your wages, if not all of them, back. Sometimes you even end up in debt to them. And that's kind of how company towns work. There's a lot of examples of them that we could go into, a lot of factory towns for different industries. But two really big examples that we should talk about are mining towns and the Pullman town outside of Chicago that's now a neighborhood of Chicago, where train cars were made. So let's start with mining towns. These are widespread throughout Appalachia and Colorado, really wherever there's sufficient coal. Coal industry historically has been a huge aspect of mining in America and also kind of the American economy and energy landscape in general. A lot of the mines that own these towns would pay the workers in something called scrip, which is a fake money that companies would print that is not valid outside of these companies' towns. It can't be exchanged for anything outside of the company store or rent in that town. So you get paid in money that you cannot save to move elsewhere. You can't bargain elsewhere. You can't save up your wages to escape because your money is worthless the minute you leave this town, and it can really only be exchanged for goods at the company store, which can be marked up as extravagantly as the company feels like. This is really messed up and leads to something called the Coal Wars, which was an era in the 19 teens where coal miners, tired of working in, I guess, important context in case you don't know this or can't extrapolate this, almost certainly know this. Coal mining is incredibly dangerous, right? There's poisonous gases. Oh, my dog's eating his toy. Okay, thank God. There's poisonous gases. There's the risk of explosion because a lot of mining involves dynamiting tunnels into rocks. But coal is flammable, so this can go really, really badly really quickly. And then breathing in coal dust and other dusts from ores that you're mining through can cause all kinds of lung illnesses, cancers, for not just the miners themselves, but their families. Incredibly dangerous. And people aren't getting paid, right? They're getting paid in fake money. So protesting, and also they're working crazy hours, like crazy hours. This is well before the existence of an 8-hour workday as the standard. It's also before the existence of child labor laws. So protesting these conditions, and the lack of actual payment, a lot of miners gathered together to form and join unions, and they regularly went on strike, which is something that coal companies did not like because that means they're losing profits. So they would hire armed agents, typically from two detective agencies, the Pinkertons and the Baldwin-Felts detectives, to union bust. And they would do this by going to these company towns and shooting machine guns into people's homes, sometimes shooting people on purpose, and then sometimes chasing people out of their homes, evicting them at gunpoint, things like that. And then sometimes they would carry out massacres. These are just a couple of examples. This is a much bigger phenomenon. Couple of very important historical ones are the Ludlow Massacre from April 20th of 1914. This took place in Ludlow, Colorado. The mine workers went on strike for a month, and the National Guard shot into the crowd of striking miners, which led to a bloody battle. In response to this battle, it's so absurd. It's so horrific. So basically, miners go on strike. The National Guard is called in by the company. Importantly, the miners were evicted for striking. So they'd been living in tents during this strike. That's important context. So the National Guard is called in, shoots into the crowd of striking miners who were armed, so they shoot back. And then after this gun battle, the National Guard sets fire to the tents, and shoots anybody who flees the fire. So people are shot to death and people burned to death. Those who fled the flames were shot, like I said, and then the camp infirmary in particular was burned, and so was everyone inside, including women and children. 25 people died in this massacre, and then there was outrage in response to this massacre, so a lot of violence followed up. And basically this only escalated the situation, and there was a 10-day-long gunfight between the striking workers and the National Guard, at which point the federal government sent in troops to stop the massacre somewhere, or to stop the 10-day gunfight following the massacre. Somewhere between 69 and 199 people were killed in this, in the aftermath of the massacre. Next up, we have the Matewan Massacre in West Virginia, which was in May 19th of 1920. Tensions had been high for years in West Virginia. A lot of the Cold Wars take place in West Virginia. There had been a lot of strikes, a lot of threats, both of further strikes and also of violence against the mine company. There was weapon stockpiling, a lot of ongoing resistance, and then a lot of ongoing union busting as well, specifically by Baldwin Felts. So on the day of this massacre, Baldwin Felts agents came to evict the mining families from company housing, and the miners resisted the eviction along with the mayor of the town they were in, which was a very pro-union male named Cabell Testerman, and then the very pro-union sheriff named Sid Hatfield. So the miners, the sheriff, and the mayor all try to stop the Baldwin Felts detectives from carrying out these evictions. It's unclear who fired first, but by the end of the day, 7 detectives were dead, as well as 2 miners, and the mayor, who was shot while trying to stop Baldwin Felts agents from arresting the sheriff for his work in attempting to block the evictions. The miners, after this, viewed Sheriff Hatfield as a hero, but Baldwin Felts thought of him as like a villain, and so he went to court for his role in this, and was acquitted, but then Baldwin Felts tried to charge him with conspiracy, so that he had to go back to the court after he was acquitted. And then when he went back to the court, he and his deputy were shot to death on the steps of the courthouse. And that was in August of 1921. And so, as you can see, there was like some sort of protracted legal battle in the intervening year. This was ultimately there goes my pencil. This was ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back, and it helped spark a even more massive uprising in the nearby mining town of Blair Mountain. So on August 25th 10,000 miners rose up and started shooting at the company representatives, the hired agents from Baldwin Felts, and the police that were on their side. And that the company, in response, hired private planes to drop bombs on the Union. So they bombed the workers, and then this carried on for like a little over a week. Because on September 2nd, the federal government called in soldiers again, and the federal soldiers came to Blair Mountain, and at this point, the miners surrendered because they, in their words, were not interested in being it. They did not see themselves as at war with the federal government. They only saw themselves as at war with the coal company and its representatives. This is remembered as the Battle of Blair Mountain. And then, so yeah, that's a bit of history of mining company towns. Here is another example. This is another really significant moment from labor history, right? The coal wars are an incredibly important moment in labor history in the U.S. Because all of this outrage and bloodshed sort of like carried the momentum of unionizing and organizing that ultimately led to us having the kinds of like labor protections that we have today. So Pullman, Chicago, we're going back in time a little bit, about 30 years back in time. So Pullman is now a neighborhood of Chicago, but it was a standalone town that was designed and owned by the Pullman's Palace Car Company, which was a train car company. It was built in 1880. Pullman workers built the town. Then in 1893, a depression strikes, and this depression, not the Great Depression, just a depression, strikes. So the company cuts wages, but doesn't cut the rent that workers are paying on the houses they built in the town they built. So people pushed back against the wage cuts and the stagnant rent. Anybody who pushed back was fired. In response to the firing, workers went on strike, starting in May of 1894 and ending in July of 1894. This strike was massive. It spread well beyond Pullman to other rail yard companies across the railroad, and it basically like shut down the rail industry for months. So the federal government sent soldiers and the National Guard in to break the strike against the wishes of the local government, interestingly enough. So there's a lot of like governments being split in these stories. Somewhere between 12 and 30 people were killed, and there was a massive outcry in response to this bloodshed, and ultimately that led to Labor Day being created as sort of like we're sorry that we killed people, have a day off laborers gesture of goodwill. So that's why we have Labor Day. Here's a picture of the striking Pullman workers on the day when they walked off the job. The strike leader of the Pullman Strike, Eugene V. Debs, which is a name you may recognize. He's also a Hoosier. He's from Terre Haute. He went on to become one of the most significant labor organizers of this era. And he was one of the co-founders of the International Workers of the World, the IWW, also known as the Wobblies, which is a really big union that any worker can join from any industry. So a lot of unions are like specific, right? You've got specific unions for coal workers. You've got specific unions for rail workers. You've got specific unions for telecommunications workers. And these are sort of like big industry unions that then have like chapters that are like local to particular workplaces or towns. So, for example, the grad students here at IU are, our union is not recognized by the school, but it is a union that does exist. And it is our union, our local like chapter it's called IGWC. Indiana Grad Workers Coalition, but we are unionized through a larger union called Union Electric. Why grad workers unionize with electrical workers, I'm not actually sure, but they're wonderful to us and we love them very much. And a lot of graduate student unions actually go through electrical worker unions, so that's kind of cool. There isn't really a large academic graduate student union. Like, there's a national union framework for professors called the American Association of University Professors. There isn't really a comparable thing for graduate workers. So if we want to participate in large-scale national labor organizing, we would need to join a different union. And that's one of the reasons we work with, like, Union Electric in our case, and also in the case of several other graduate student unions around the country. So that's kind of cool. But anyway, for the most part, you have to be in a particular industry or workplace to join a particular either chapter for a workplace or a region, or to join a particular union. But in the case of the IWW, literally anyone can join from literally anywhere. And it is worldwide. Here are two of their symbols. This is their logo at the bottom. You can see it says IWW for International Workers of the World with a little world picture. And then this black cat is called the Sabo Tabby kitten, because it does sabotage, and there's like a good song about it. The IWW and like labor organizing in this era loves songs, so that's a fun fact. Anyway, Eugene Debs was one of the co-founders of this, along with Joe Hill. Speaking of songs, was prominent songwriter of labor songs. Debs also ran for president 5 times, which is a lot. Company towns today, they still exist, not nearly as much. There are a couple. Disney used to have some in Florida. Hershey, Pennsylvania is a great example of a company town. There's a number of company towns in Silicon Valley for various tech companies. I think Facebook has one. I think Apple might have one. I think Google might have one. I'm guessing on those last two. And then one could argue pretty easily that private prisons where inmates work manufacturing jobs also function as company towns, because private prisons are owned by corporations. Inmates do work that the private prison profits off of. It profits off of them living there, but it also profits off of their labor. And then prison workers do go on strike. Maybe not as often as workers who are not incarcerated, because the stakes are higher and it's harder to organize, but they do go on strike. There have been a number of high-profile strikes over the years, even over recent years. And incarcerated workers also participate in labor unions. For instance, the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee, which is affiliated with the International Workers of the World, is sort of like the aspect of that exists within prisons and jails. Futurism, company towns, and the labor movement. Labor unions fight for better futures for workers. Like, that's sort of their goal, right? Even if you got a raise today, even if you got the best contract, the contract that your union was fighting for today, it's not going to immediately improve your quality of life, right? It's going to improve your quality of life tomorrow, when you get that money, when you get those long-term gains. And labor movement gains like weekends, caps on shift lengths, child labor laws, the existence of Labor Day, and so on, have long-term benefits far beyond the lives of the first workers who fought for them and won them. Most company towns also have a lot of like futurist energy. A lot of them use really utopian rhetoric around like the planned community aspect of them, idyllic language as a way of convincing people to come if economic dire straits aren't convincing enough. Olivar does that, for instance, right? It talks itself up as like this amazing opportunity that could sort of like solve the problems of people living in towns like Robledo. And not everyone's convinced, right? Harry's not convinced. Um, the Olamina family's not convinced, but the Garfield family is. Here are some sources. And that'll be it for this week. I'll see you guys again next week, and hope you have a great weekend. Bye.